Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is September 4th. On this day in 2005, days after Hurricane Katrina tore through New Orleans, violence struck again. But this time, it wasn't from the storm. It was from the very people sworn to protect the city. On the Danziger Bridge, a group of New Orleans police officers opened fire on unarmed civilians, killing 2 and wounding 4. Today, we're talking about the Danziger Bridge shooting and the years-long cover-up that followed. Let's get started. To understand the Danziger Bridge shootings, you have to picture New Orleans in the first week of September 2005. Hurricane Katrina had made landfall on August 29th, and while the storm itself was destructive, the real disaster came when the levees broke. More than 80% of the city flooded. Entire neighborhoods vanished underwater. Families climbed onto rooftops waving white towels for helicopters that never came. Others were trapped in attics as the water rose. By September 4th, the city was barely functioning. Electricity was out and the hospitals were overwhelmed. Tens of thousands of residents were displaced, many stranded at the Superdome or the convention center in horrific conditions. Food and clean water were scarce. Rumors of looting, violence, and snipers spread faster than officials could confirm them, creating a sense of paranoia and fear. And in the middle of this chaos was the New Orleans Police Department. Already plagued with corruption and misconduct before Katrina, the NOPD was stretched thin. Many officers had abandoned their posts, others were working with little sleep or direction. It was a force on the brink of disaster. And that disaster happened on the Danziger Bridge that Sunday morning. On September 4th, 5 NOPD officers drove to the Danziger Bridge in a rented truck. They weren't in uniform, and they carried assault rifles, including an unauthorized AK-47 and an M4 carbine. According to their later claims, they were responding to a call that officers were under fire. But what they found wasn't armed gunmen, and it wasn't officers under fire. It was families. It was people who were trying to get across the bridge, carrying bags of food and water, just searching for safety. But without warning, the officers opened fire. 17-year-old James Brissett, who had gone out with friends to look for supplies, was killed instantly. He wasn't armed. He wasn't looting. He was just a teenager trying to survive in a city that had abandoned him. 40-year-old Ronald Madison, who had a developmental disability and was described by his family as gentle and shy, was shot in the back 7 times as he tried to run away. The gunfire didn't stop there. Members of the Bartholomew family were caught in a barrage. Susan Bartholomew was shot so badly that she lost her arm. Her husband, Leonard, was struck multiple times. Their teenage daughter, Lesha, was shot 4 times. Family friend, Jose Holmes Jr., was critically injured after being hit in the stomach. Witnesses later said the officers lined up, quote, like they were at a firing range, end quote. When the smoke cleared, 2 were dead, 4 were gravely wounded, and the fragile trust between New Orleans residents and their police force was shattered beyond repair. As shocking as the shooting was, what came next was almost worse. Rather than admitting to opening fire on unarmed civilians, the officers created an elaborate cover story. They claimed that they'd been shot at first, that at least 4 armed men had opened fire on them from the bridge. But the evidence quickly showed that this was a desperate and stupid lie. There were no guns near the victims. So, Lieutenant Michael Lohman decided to fix that. He planted one. He retrieved a gun from his home, brought it to the scene, and claimed it had been found next to the victims. Detective Arthur Archie Kaufman took the lead on the paperwork. He fabricated witness statements. He wrote false reports. He invented a narrative that the officers had been ambushed and fired back in self-defense. The conspiracy went deep. Officers held secret meetings in abandoned police buildings to rehearse their testimony. They coached each other on what to say and what not to. And to bolster their story, they arrested Lance Madison, Ronald's brother, and charged him with 8 counts of attempted murder, even though he had no weapon and there was no evidence against him. For years, that was the official story, that the officers had faced armed attackers on the Danziger Bridge and responded with force. It was all a lie. It took nearly 6 years before the truth began to surface. In 2011, 5 officers finally went on trial in federal court. The charges ranged from civil rights violations to obstruction of justice. Over weeks of testimony, the lies unraveled. Survivors told their stories. Ballistic evidence showed that the victims had been unarmed. The planted gun was exposed. The jury delivered guilty verdicts. 4 of the officers, Kenneth Bowen, Robert Gisevius, Anthony Villavasso, and Robert Falcon, were convicted of opening fire on civilians. Detective Kaufman, who hadn't been at the bridge but orchestrated the cover-up, was convicted as well. In 2012, sentences came down hard. Falcon received 65 years in prison. Bowen and Gisevius, 40 years each. Villavasso got 38 years, and Kaufman received 6. For the families of the victims, it felt like justice at last. But relief was short-lived. In 2013, a federal judge overturned the convictions. Prosecutors from the Department of Justice had anonymously posted inflammatory comments online during the trial, painting the case. The guilty verdicts were thrown out. For survivors, it was devastating. Years of waiting, of fighting for truth, were undone by misconduct on the part of those meant to deliver them justice. By 2016, the case reached a compromise. Rather than endure another grueling trial, the officers agreed to plea deals. They admitted guilt, something they'd never done before, but to reduce charges. Their sentences ranged from 3 to 12 years, far lighter than the original terms. For many, it wasn't enough, but for James's mother, the confession mattered. She told reporters, quote, "I finally got what I wanted. Someone to confess I did it. That did my heart all the good in the world," end quote. It wasn't full justice, but it was accountability, however imperfect. In December 2016, the city of New Orleans reached a $13.3 million settlement with the survivors and families of the victims. It also covered other cases of police abuse during Katrina, including the killing of Henry Glover and the beating death of Raymond Robert. Mayor Mitch Landrieu issued an apology. Quote, "On behalf of the city, we are so sorry these families have had to endure this hurt. The people standing behind you have chosen to give us the grace and the blessing of forgiveness," end quote. For some families, the settlement felt like validation, that their suffering had finally been acknowledged. But forgiveness doesn't ease betrayal. For the people of New Orleans, the Danziger Bridge shootings became a symbol, not just of one horrific event, but of a police department that had lost its way. The NOPD has since undergone reforms, including federal oversight, but the scars remain. Survivors still bear the wounds, both physical and emotional. Families still grieve, and the city still remembers how, in its darkest hour, those sworn to protect it opened fire instead. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found today's episode compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!